Out here on California's endless highways, the night isn't just dark. It's alive. Truckers tell of ghostly figures standing in the fog, trucks that vanish without a trace, and screams that echo across empty passes. These aren't stories made up to scare you. They're warnings from the road itself. And if you are new here, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you never miss a chilling story. Now let's begin. My life is measured in miles. For nearly 2 decades, I've been a long-haul trucker, and the rhythmic hum of 16 wheels on asphalt is more familiar to me than my own heartbeat. My name is Tommy Reynolds. I'm 38 now, and my world is a predictable loop of loading docks, greasy spoons, and the endless hypnotic ribbon of the American highway. I haul produce mostly up and down the spine of California, from the sun-scorched fields of the Imperial Valley to the bustling markets of Sacramento and beyond. It's a lonely job, but it's an honest one. You learn to find comfort in the solitude, in the quiet companionship of the radio, and in the familiar glow of your dashboard lights pushing back the oppressive darkness of a country night. But one night, that darkness pushed back. It was a Tuesday in late October. The air had that crisp pre-winter bite to it, and the sky was a starless, inky black. I was behind schedule, a cardinal sin in my line of work. A multi-car pile-up on the I-5 had turned the freeway into a parking lot for hours, and now I was racing against the clock to get a truckload of fresh lettuce to a distribution center before it was rejected. Every minute counted. My dispatcher, a perpetually stressed man named Dave, had been buzzing my phone, his voice tight with anxiety. "Just get it there, Tommy. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes." The words echoed in my head as I stared at the sea of red taillights ahead. That's when the idea, a foolish, desperate idea, took root. I knew these roads like the back of my hand. I knew there was an old decommissioned stretch of Highway 99 that ran parallel to the interstate for a good 30 miles. It was a relic, a ghost of the pre-interstate era, bypassed and forgotten by modern traffic. Locals used it sometimes, but most truckers avoided it. It was poorly maintained, narrow, and rumored to be unsettling at night. But tonight it was my only shot. Pulling off the interstate felt like stepping back in time. The smooth, wide lanes of the I-5 gave way to cracked, weathered asphalt. The bright modern streetlights vanished, plunging me into an almost absolute darkness, broken only by the powerful beams of my rig. The air itself seemed to change. It grew colder, heavier, and a strange silence descended, the kind that feels like it's pressing in on you from all sides. My state-of-the-art satellite radio, which had been playing a classic rock station just moments before, dissolved into a shower of static. I fiddled with the dial, trying to find a signal, any signal. All I got was static, and then faintly, something else bled through. It was music, but not like anything on the radio today. It was a mournful, twangy country song, the kind my grandfather used to listen to, tinny and distant, as if being broadcast from a great distance or from another time. I tried to shake off the unease. This was just an old road. The weird radio signal was probably due to the lack of repeaters out here. I focused on driving, my eyes scanning the dark, empty road ahead. The trees on either side were skeletal, their bare branches clawing at the night sky. For miles, I was the only soul out there. The loneliness was profound, a physical weight in the cab of my truck. That's when I saw them. 2 faint, round headlights appeared in my driver's side mirror. They were far back, but they were there. A flicker of relief went through me. I wasn't alone after all. Probably just another local who knew the same shortcut. The headlights grew steadily brighter, closing the distance between us. But there was something odd about them. They had a soft, yellowish glow, not the sharp white glare of modern halogen or LED lights. And the vehicle they belonged to was moving fast, faster than I would have thought wise on a road this rough. I kept my speed steady, expecting the vehicle to either fall back or pass me. It did neither. It just kept getting closer until it was right on my tail. The proximity was unnerving. I could feel the glare of its lights boring into the back of my cab. I tapped my brakes lightly, a signal for the driver to back off. The truck behind me didn't react. It stayed glued to my bumper. Annoyance began to curdle with a new, colder feeling. Fear. There was no sound. That was the other thing. I should have been able to hear the roar of its engine, the crunch of its tires on the gravelly asphalt. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own rig and the ghostly country music crackling from my speakers. It was as if the truck behind me was a phantom gliding silently through the night. My heart started to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the eerie silence. I decided I'd had enough. I slowed down, inviting it to pass. The truck behind me pulled out into the oncoming lane, its yellow lights washing over my cab. As it drew alongside me, I turned my head to get a look at the impatient driver. My blood ran cold. It was a truck, but like nothing I'd ever seen on a modern road. It was a vintage Peterbilt, a classic snub-nose from the 1950s, maybe early 60s. The paint was faded, the chrome pitted and dull, but it looked solid, a relic from a bygone era. But that wasn't what made me gasp, what made the air freeze in my lungs. The driver's seat was empty. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The massive truck was perfectly keeping pace with mine, its wheels turning, its hulking frame gliding effortlessly over the broken road, and there was no one behind the wheel. The steering wheel was still, the cab a dark, vacant space. I could see right through the passenger window to the skeletal trees on the other side of the road. It was impossible. A hallucination. I must have been more tired than I thought. I blinked hard, shaking my head, praying it would disappear. It didn't. It stayed right there, a silent, impossible companion in the crushing darkness. The ghost truck held its position for what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than a minute. It felt like it was studying me, its empty cab radiating a palpable sense of cold and sorrow. The old country song on my radio seemed to swell, the singer's voice full of heartbreak and loss. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the ghost truck began to accelerate. It pulled ahead of me, its taillights two dim red eyes in the night. It didn't follow the curve of the road. It just drove straight, gaining speed until it simply vanished. One moment it was there, a solid three-dimensional object. The next it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as if it had never been. I slammed on my brakes, my rig groaning in protest as it skidded to a halt in the middle of the abandoned highway. The cab was filled with the smell of burnt rubber and my own ragged breathing. The radio fell silent, the static disappearing, leaving only the sound of my own hammering heart. I sat there for a long time, trembling, staring at the empty road ahead. There was nothing there. No truck, no taillights, no sign that anything had been there at all. I never made it to the distribution center on time. I pulled over at the first well-lit truck stop I found when I finally rejoined the interstate. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because the woman behind the counter just poured me a coffee without me even asking. I tried to tell an old-timer at the counter what I'd seen. He just nodded slowly, his eyes full of a knowing weariness. "You took the old 99, didn't you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded, unable to speak. "There's stories," he said, swirling the coffee in his cup. "Been telling them for 50 years. Story of a trucker named Charlie hauling a load of steel. Lost his brakes on that stretch back in '58. Went off the road in a fiery crash. They say he's still out there on nights like this, still trying to finish his last run. I don't know if the old-timer's story is true. I don't know what I saw that night. A trick of the light? A waking dream brought on by exhaustion? But I know this. It felt real. The cold, the silence, the empty driver's seat. It's burned into my memory. I've never taken a shortcut again. I stick to the main roads, the bright, busy, and safe interstates. Because I know now that some roads are best left to the ghosts that haunt them. And I know that when you're out there alone in the dead of night, you are never, ever truly alone. Did you like this story? Please let me know in the comments and don't forget to like this video. I'm not your typical trucker. At 27, I'm usually the youngest person and one of the only women at any given loading dock. I got into independent hauling because I crave freedom. I love the solitude of the open road, the feeling of being a self-contained unit moving across the vast, beautiful canvas of the American West. And of all the places my rig has taken me, none has captured my heart like Death Valley. Most people see it as a barren, hostile wasteland. I see it as a place of stark, brutal beauty. The way the sun paints the Panamint Range in shades of gold and purple at dawn, the sheer, overwhelming silence of the salt flats. It speaks to a part of my soul. But Death Valley has a darker side. It's a place of extremes, a place that doesn't suffer fools, and a place where the line between reality and illusion is as thin and shimmering as the heat haze on the horizon. I learned that lesson on a day I can never forget. It was a blistering afternoon in August, the kind of day in Death Valley where the air itself feels like a physical weight, and the sun is a malevolent eye in a bleached white sky. My truck's thermometer was reading 122 degrees Fahrenheit. I was hauling a specialized load of scientific equipment from a lab in Nevada to a research facility near Lone Pine, a route that took me right through the heart of the valley. I was making good time, my air conditioner blasting on high, creating a small, refrigerated bubble of civilization in the midst of the primeval landscape. I've always been a bit of a wanderer, someone who prefers the scenic route. So when my GPS, which had been acting a little glitchy all day, suddenly highlighted a new route, an unmarked dirt road that it claimed would shave a full hour off my trip, my curiosity was piqued. The map showed it as a straight shot cutting across a wide, flat basin that looked empty on the satellite view. My schedule was flexible, and the thought of exploring a road less traveled was too tempting to resist. It was a stupid decision born of arrogance and a misplaced sense of adventure. It's a decision I will regret for the rest of my life. The turnoff was barely there, just a break in the scrubby vegetation at the side of the highway. The road itself was hard-packed dirt, wide enough for my rig, and it stretched out before me like a dusty brown ribbon disappearing into the shimmering heat waves in the distance. For the first few miles, everything was fine. The ride was a bit bumpy, but my truck handled it well. The scenery was breathtaking in its desolation. There was nothing but cracked earth, scattered creosote bushes, and the immense silent mountains in the far distance. It felt like I was driving on the surface of Mars. About 15 minutes in, I glanced at my side mirror. A habit so ingrained in me that I do it without thinking. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The road behind me was gone. I don't mean it was obscured by dust or distance. I mean it had vanished. Where there should have been a clear straight line of disturbed dirt stretching back to the highway, there was only the same cracked, undisturbed desert floor that flanked me on either side. It was as if the road was being erased from existence the moment my tires passed over it. My first thought was that it was a mirage. The heat does strange things to your perception out here. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. The pristine, unbroken desert stretched out behind me as if my 40-ton truck had simply materialized out of thin air in the middle of this basin. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my consciousness. I checked my other mirror. Same thing. No road. I looked ahead and the road was still there, stretching invitingly towards the distant mountains. It was a horrifying paradox. I was driving on a road that for all intents and purposes did not exist. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. My GPS, the very device that had led me into this nightmare, was now just a blank screen with a single blinking dot representing my truck in a vast, empty void. The feeling of isolation was absolute. I was a tiny, insignificant speck in an immense, hostile world, and the rules of reality no longer seemed to apply. My mind raced. Should I stop? Should I try to turn back? But how could I turn back on a road that wasn't there? The thought of trying to navigate my massive rig over that virgin, cracked earth was terrifying. I could get stuck, break an axle, and be stranded out here where no one would ever find me. The sun would bake me alive in hours. There was only one choice: forward. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator, my eyes locked on the phantom road ahead. I didn't dare look in my mirrors again. I was afraid of what I might see or what I might not see. The silence in the cab was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The world outside the windshield seemed to shimmer and warp, the heat and my own fear creating a surreal, dreamlike landscape. Every rock and bush seemed to take on a sinister shape. The mountains in the distance never seemed to get any closer. Time itself seemed to stretch and distort. I could have been driving for 10 minutes or 10 hours. I started talking to myself, my voice sounding small and thin in the oppressive silence. It's okay, Sam. Just a mirage, just the heat. Keep driving, don't stop. It was a desperate mantra against the encroaching madness. I felt a terrifying, primal urge to just stop the truck, get out, and run screaming into the desert. But the trucker in me, the professional, kept me pinned to the seat, my hands locked on the wheel. Then, just as I felt the last of my composure beginning to crumble, I saw something ahead. It was a flicker of light, a reflection. As I got closer, my heart leaped. It was the glint of sunlight off the windshield of a car on another road, the main highway. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed the accelerator. The phantom road led me up a slight rise, and there it was, the familiar, beautiful, solid black line of the paved highway, no more than a quarter-mile away. The connection point was seamless. My dirt road just flowed right onto the asphalt. I didn't slow down. I hit the pavement at 50 miles an hour, my tires singing on the solid surface. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For a moment, I just drove, my body trembling with relief. After a mile or two, I couldn't resist. I had to know. I pulled my rig over onto the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. I got out of the cab, the blistering heat hitting me like a physical blow. I walked to the edge of the road and looked back in the direction I had come from. There was nothing. No dirt road, no turnoff, no break in the vegetation, just the endless, flat, sun-baked expanse of the desert basin stretching all the way to the mountains. It was pristine, untouched, as if no vehicle had ever crossed it. My path, my impossible road, had been completely swallowed by the desert. It had never been there at all. I stood there for a long time, the sun beating down on my head, trying to reconcile the solid asphalt beneath my feet with the impossible memory of the last hour. I got back in my truck, my mind reeling. I never told my dispatcher or anyone else in the business what happened. They would have said I was crazy or that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. But I know what I experienced. Death Valley is an ancient place full of secrets. Some say there are gateways there, places where the world isn't quite stitched together right. Maybe I drove through one. Maybe I drove on a road that existed in another time, or another dimension. I don't have any answers. All I know is that I have a deep and abiding respect for the desert now. I still love its beauty, but I am also terrified of its power and of the secrets it holds within its vast, silent heart. And I never ever trust a shortcut. Did you like this story? Please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. I'm 45 years old and I've been driving trucks for more than half my life. But I'm not just a trucker. I'm a historian of the road. My cab is filled with books about the old highways, the forgotten towns, and the people who built this country 1 mile at a time. My favorite of all is the granddaddy of them all, Route 66. The Mother Road. For most people, it's just a line on a map, a collection of kitschy, tourist traps. But for me, it's a living museum. Every abandoned motel, every crumbling diner, every rusted-out car sinking back into the earth tells a story. I make a point of pulling over whenever I can, of walking through these ruins and trying to hear the echoes of the past. I've always found it peaceful, a way to connect with the ghosts of a bygone era. But one evening in the Mojave, I learned that some ghosts don't just echo, they speak. I was on a cross-country haul taking a load of machine parts from Illinois to California. I had planned my route specifically to include a long, lonely stretch of the original Route 66 between Kingman and Barstow. This is one of the most desolate and best-preserved sections of the old road, a place where you can drive for an hour without seeing another car. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the desert floor. The sky was a spectacular explosion of orange, pink, and deep purple. It was magical. Up ahead, I saw a silhouette I recognized from one of my books. It was an old gas station, a classic box and canopy design from the 1940s. Its pumps were long gone, its windows were shattered, and its walls were a canvas of faded graffiti. The sign, hanging by a single rusty chain, was unreadable, worn smooth by decades of desert wind and sun. It was perfect. I felt that familiar pull, the historian's itch to explore. I geared down, the air brakes hissing as I pulled my rig onto the cracked, weed-choked concrete apron in front of the station. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was immense. The only sound was the faint whisper of the wind and the ticking of my truck's cooling engine. I grabbed my flashlight, even though there was still some light in the sky, and hopped down from the cab. The air was cool and smelled of dust and creosote. I felt a sense of reverence as I approached the building, the same feeling I get when entering an old church. This was a holy place, a temple to the American road trip. The door to the small office and store was gone, leaving a dark, gaping maw. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The interior was stripped bare. The shelves were gone. The counter was gone. Everything of value had been looted decades ago. All that remained were dust, cobwebs, and the ghosts of countless conversations, of travelers stopping for a cold drink and a map before heading out into the vast unknown of the desert. I ran my hand along the grimy wall, trying to imagine it freshly painted. The shelves stocked with candy bars and motor oil. I moved from the office into the attached two-bay garage. It was darker in here. The large garage doors were gone, but the roof cast the space in deep shadow. The air was thick with the phantom smell of old oil and gasoline. A heavy workbench stood against the back wall, its surface scarred and stained. Rusted tools lay scattered on the floor, too worthless even for looters. It was a scene of perfect decay, a snapshot of abandonment. I was completely absorbed, lost in the history of the place. That's when I heard it. Ding ding. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was the sound of an old-fashioned service bell, the kind that used to sit on the counter, the kind a customer would tap to get the attendant's attention. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. My heart, which had been beating at a slow, relaxed pace, suddenly kicked into overdrive. It had to be the wind, a piece of loose metal maybe, hitting something else. It had to be. I stood perfectly still, holding my breath, straining my ears against the silence. For a long moment there was nothing. I was about to let out my breath to laugh at my own jumpiness when it happened again. Ding ding. It was clearer this time. It was coming from the darkest corner of the garage near the workbench. My logical mind was scrambling for an explanation. An animal? A bird? But the sound was too clean, too metallic, too deliberate. It was the sound of a finger pressing a bell. I raised my flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a clean white circle in the gloom. I swept the light across the corner. There was nothing there, just a pile of old rotted tires and more dust. I was starting to feel a real primal fear now. The peaceful historical site had suddenly become menacing. The air grew heavy and cold, a damp, cellar-like chill that had no business being in the dry desert air. I started to back away slowly, my boots scuffing softly on the concrete floor. My eyes were locked on the dark corner, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. I had taken 2 steps back when I heard the voice. It was a whisper, thin and reedy like the rustle of dry leaves. It was old, tired, and it came directly from the shadows my flashlight couldn't penetrate. "Fill her up?" The words hung in the cold air, and every hair on my body stood on end. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a ghostly reflex from a long-dead attendant. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. This wasn't in my head. This was real. I was not alone in that garage. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The sound was trapped in my throat, a strangled knot of pure terror. As I stood there, paralyzed, I saw something move in the corner of my eye, a flicker of motion in the deepest part of the shadow. My head snapped towards it. For a split second, I saw a shape, an outline of a man. He was stooped, wearing what looked like greasy overalls and a mechanic's cap. I couldn't see a face, just a dark, vaguely human form that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was there for a heartbeat, and then it dissolved back into the blackness. That's what broke the spell. The sight of that figure, that thing, sent a jolt of pure animal panic through me. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I scrambled out of the garage, my feet slipping on the loose gravel. I sprinted across the concrete, apron, the sound of my own ragged gasps loud in the silent evening. I fumbled with the handle of my truck door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I hauled myself into the cab, slammed the door, and fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I didn't even wait for the air pressure to build. I threw the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The rig lurched forward, tires spinning on the loose ground before finding purchase. I swerved back onto the old highway, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. As I sped away, my eyes were glued to my rearview mirror. The abandoned gas station shrank in the distance, a dark silhouette against the dying embers of the sunset. And just before it disappeared from view, I could have sworn I heard it, carried on the wind, one last time. Ding, ding. I drove for an hour at top speed before my heart rate even began to return to normal. I've stopped at dozens of abandoned places since then, but the magic is gone. Now when I look at the ruins, I don't just see history. I see the shadows in the corners. I feel the cold spots in the air. And I listen for the sounds that shouldn't be there. The Mother Road is a museum, all right. But some of the exhibits aren't behind glass, and they're not as dead as you think. I'm a contract hauler, which means I take the jobs other people don't want. The late-night runs, the tight deadlines, the difficult roads. At 32, I've built a reputation for being reliable and fearless. That's why I didn't hesitate when a job came up to transport a custom-built yacht mast from Monterey down to a private dock near San Simeon. The catch? It had to be done overnight, and the route was California's legendary Highway 1, right through the heart of Big Sur. By day, Big Sur is arguably the most beautiful coastline in the world. It's a place of dramatic cliffs, turquoise coves, and towering redwood trees. It's a postcard come to life, but at night it transforms. It becomes a different beast entirely. The road is a narrow, twisting serpent clinging to the edge of a continent. There are no streetlights, no shoulders, and in many places only a flimsy guardrail separates you from a 1,000-foot drop into the churning black Pacific Ocean. Add a thick blanket of coastal fog to the mix, and it becomes one of the most treacherous drives imaginable. I set out from Monterey just after midnight. The fog rolled in almost immediately, as it so often does on this coast. It was a dense, wet fog that reduced my visibility to less than 50 feet. My world shrank to the small bubble of reality illuminated by my headlights. The white line on the right side of the road became my lifeline, the only thing keeping me from drifting into oblivion. The oversized mast I was hauling made every hairpin turn a slow, calculated maneuver. It was stressful, nerve-wracking work, requiring my absolute concentration. The road climbed higher and the fog grew thicker. It swirled in my headlights like ghostly apparitions. The only sounds were the low growl of my engine, the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers, and the distant mournful moan of a foghorn somewhere out on the black water. It was an intensely isolating experience. I felt like the last person on Earth navigating a road to nowhere. I was about an hour south of the Bixby Bridge, on one of the highest and most exposed sections of the highway. The cliff to my right was a sheer, vertical drop. I couldn't see the ocean, but I could hear it, a constant angry roar far below, a reminder of the lethal consequences of a single mistake. I was leaning forward, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes straining to pierce the soupy darkness. That's when my headlights caught something. It was on the right side of the road, on the cliff's edge. At first, I thought it was a rock formation or a strangely shaped tree. But as I got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a person, or at least it was shaped like a person. It was tall, unnaturally so, and slender. It was standing perfectly still, its feet planted precariously close to the crumbling edge of the asphalt. But the most terrifying thing about it was its appearance. It wasn't wearing dark clothes. It was dark. It was a solid three-dimensional silhouette, a void in the shape of a man. My powerful headlights, which cut through the fog and illuminated the rock face behind it, seemed to be absorbed by it. It had no discernible features, no face, no hands, no clothes. It was just a patch of pure, absolute blackness, a hole in the fabric of the night. My mind struggled to make sense of it. A trick of the fog, a shadow. But there was nothing to cast such a shadow. The figure was solid, present. I slowed the truck down, my foot hovering over the brake. A part of me wanted to stop, to stare, to understand what I was looking at. But a much older, more primal part of me was screaming in silent terror. Every instinct in my body told me that this thing was wrong, that it was dangerous. As my truck crawled past it, I could feel its presence. It didn't move a muscle. Yet I felt its attention shift to me. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt a gaze lock onto my cab. A gaze that was ancient, intelligent, and filled with a cold, bottomless malevolence. It was a feeling of being judged and found wanting, of being sized up by a predator. The air in my cab grew frigid, and a shiver racked my entire body, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. I pressed my foot on the accelerator, wanting nothing more than to put as much distance as possible between myself and that thing. As I passed, I risked a glance in my passenger side mirror. The figure was still there, a stark black cutout against the swirling gray fog. And then it did something that will haunt my nightmares forever. It turned its head slowly, deliberately, and followed the movement of my truck. It was watching me go. I didn't dare look in my mirrors again. I drove with a frantic, desperate energy, taking the treacherous turns faster than I should have. The image of that black silhouette was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. The feeling of its cold, hateful gaze lingered on my skin. I felt hunted. I didn't start to feel safe until the fog began to thin as I descended towards San Simeon and the first signs of civilization appeared. I delivered the mast, my hands still shaking as I unstrapped it. The man at the dock, a weathered old sailor, took one look at my pale face and asked if I was all right. On a whim, I asked him, "Are there stories about this stretch of coast? About people seeing things at night in the fog?" He stopped what he was doing and gave me a long, hard look. "You saw him, didn't you?" he said, his voice low. "The Watcher." He told me the legend. It's a story that sailors and locals have been telling for 100 years. They say a spirit or a demon haunts the highest cliffs of Big Sur. They call it the Watcher of the Coast. They say it stands there on foggy nights, a dark figure at the edge of the world. Some say it's the ghost of someone who drove off the cliff. Others say it's something much older, a guardian of the place that resents the intrusion of the road. And some say it isn't just watching. They say it calls to people, that it whispers to drivers, luring them, tempting them to turn the wheel just a few inches to the right, to join it in the cold, black water below. I don't know what I saw that night, a ghost, a demon, a hallucination born of stress and fog, but I know that it was real. I felt its presence. I felt its hatred. I've been offered other jobs that require the Big Sur night run, and I've turned every single one of them down. I'll face a blizzard in the Rockies or a hurricane in the Gulf before I'll ever again drive that road in the dark, because I know what's out there, standing in the fog at the edge of the world, and it's watching and it's waiting. My name is Dylan Ortiz. I'm 41 years old, and for the last 15 of those years, my life has been defined by the steep grades and hairpin turns of the Sierra Nevada mountains. I'm a lumber hauler. It's not a glamorous job. It's a job of grit, precision, and a deep, abiding respect for the raw power of nature. While other truckers are cruising down the long, straight monotony of the I-5, I'm navigating roads that cling to the sides of mountains like frightened lovers, my rig groaning under the immense weight of freshly felled cedar, pine, and fir. The mountains are my office, my sanctuary, and on one unforgettable night, my tormentor. You can't work in these mountains without learning their language. You learn the sound of the wind as it whispers through the sugar pines versus how it howls across a barren granite peak. You learn to read the sky, to know the difference between harmless afternoon clouds and the bruised, angry-looking thunderheads that can dump a foot of snow in an hour, even in late spring. You learn to respect the silence. Up here, silence isn't an absence of sound. It's a presence. It's the weight of millions of tons of rock and a billion trees holding their breath. I've seen bears amble across the road, their fur the color of rich soil. I've seen mountain lions, sleek and powerful, their yellow eyes glowing in my headlights for a fleeting second before melting back into the shadows. I've even had a golden eagle pace my truck for a mile, soaring on the updrafts from the canyons below. I thought I was a part of this place, that I understood its rhythms and its secrets. I was wrong. The mountains have secrets far older than the roads carved into them. secrets that are not meant for human eyes. The job came in on a Thursday. It was a rush order, as they so often are. A high-end housing development going up in a small, wealthy town on the eastern slope of the Sierras, a place for city folk to buy second homes and pretend to be rugged. The contractor, a slick, impatient man whose voice grated on the phone, had miscalculated his inventory. He needed a full load of prime cedar beams, and he needed them by sunrise the next day, or his whole construction schedule would be thrown off. "I'm paying a premium for this, Ortiz," he'd said, as if that made all the difference. "A big one. Just get it here." Normally this would be a straightforward, if long, overnight run, but this was the Sierras, the main route, a modern, well-maintained highway that cuts through a lower pass, was closed. A late-season storm had triggered a massive rock slide, burying a half-mile stretch of the road under tons of granite and earth. Caltrans was saying it would be days, maybe a week, before it was cleared. That left only one option, a winding, treacherous detour over a secondary pass known to us locals simply as Sierra Road. Sierra Road is less a road and more a scar. It's an old logging route, paved over decades ago but never properly engineered for the kind of weight I haul. It's narrow, poorly lit, and in the winter it's not even plowed. It's a road of last resort. I knew it would be a grueling drive, a constant battle between man and machine against gravity and friction. But the premium was significant, enough to cover my daughter's college tuition for a semester. And if I'm being honest, a part of me, the proud, stubborn part, relished the challenge. I looked at the map, traced the winding path with my finger, and said, "I can do it." I loaded up at the lumber mill as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery strokes of orange and red. The smell of fresh-cut cedar filled my cab, a clean, sharp scent that I've always associated with hard work and an honest living. As I strapped down the massive beams, double and triple checking the chains, I felt a familiar sense of purpose. This is what I do. I move mountains of wood over mountains of rock. The first hour of the drive was deceptively peaceful. I left the familiar valley behind and began my ascent into the high country. The road was empty. The sky was a deep, clear indigo, and a brilliant full moon was rising over the eastern peaks, so bright it seemed to be competing with my headlights. It bathed the landscape in a soft, ethereal glow, turning the granite faces of the mountains into silver monuments. The forest was quiet, the towering pines and ancient sequoias standing like silent, watchful giants on either side of the narrow road. The only sounds were the deep, steady growl of my engine in a low gear and the occasional ping of a pebble kicked up by my tires. It was almost meditative. It was just me, my truck, and the immense, sleeping wilderness. I felt a sense of calm, a feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. As I climbed higher, nearing the 8,000-foot summit of the pass, the character of the night began to shift. It started subtly. The temperature gauge on my dash dipped sharply, the air outside growing bitingly cold. And then came the fog. This was no ordinary mountain fog, not the thin, wispy veils that drift through the trees. This was something else entirely. It rose from the ground itself, a thick, opaque white mass that seemed to boil up from the canyons below. It wasn't like driving into a cloud. It was like driving into a vat of milk. It clung to the road, a dense, heavy blanket that swallowed the asphalt and smothered the moonlight. My world, which had been a vast panorama of silver mountains and starry sky, shrank to a claustrophobic bubble of swirling white. My high beams were useless. They just reflected off the fog, creating a blinding wall of glare. I switched to my low beams and fog lights, which helped a little, but my visibility was still reduced to maybe 20 feet. The road ahead was a complete mystery. I could no longer see the towering trees that I knew were just feet from the road's edge. I couldn't see the sheer drop-offs that I knew were waiting to claim anyone who made a mistake. I slowed the truck to a crawl, maybe 5 miles an hour. My hands, which had been relaxed on the wheel, were now locked in a white knuckle grip. Every muscle in my body was tense, but the most unnerving part was the silence. The fog was a perfect sound insulator. The familiar sounds of the forest, the whisper of wind, the rustle of unseen animals, the distant cry of a hunting owl, were gone. Completely. The only sound was the low, laboring thrum of my engine, and even that sounded strangely muted, distant, as if it were coming from someone else's truck. It was a dead, suffocating silence, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the last living thing on the planet. It felt like the fog itself had choked the life out of the world. I was leaning forward, my face almost pressed against the windshield, my eyes straining to follow the faint painted white line on the edge of the road. That line was my entire universe. It was the only thing tethering me to reality, the only thing keeping my 16 wheels on solid ground. That's when I saw the lights. It started as a single faint flicker in my peripheral vision off to the right, deep in the woods. In that disorienting wall of white, any light was a shock. I blinked, thinking it was a reflection from my own headlights, a strange optical illusion created by the fog, a ghost light. I tried to dismiss it, but then I saw another one, and a moment later, a third. They were not reflections. They were small, distinct points of light, and they were moving. They had a soft, yellowish, unsteady glow like the flame of a candle or an old-fashioned kerosene lantern. They bobbed and weaved through the trees, their light appearing and disappearing as they passed behind the massive trunks of the pines. My first rational thought was, search party. The mountains are a popular place for hikers and campers, and people get lost all the time. Maybe someone had wandered off a trail and their friends were looking for them. It was a comforting thought, a human explanation for a strange phenomenon. I slowed down even more, my foot hovering over the brake. I peered into the impenetrable wall of trees and fog, trying to make out the shapes of the people holding the lanterns. I rolled down my window, the frigid, damp air rushing into the cab, hoping to hear voices, a shout, anything. But there was only that dead, oppressive silence. And the lights weren't moving the way a search party would. A search party would be spread out, calling to each other, their movements somewhat random as they scanned the forest floor. These lights were different. They were moving in a loose formation, almost a procession. And they were moving with a purpose. They were pacing me. As my truck crawled forward, the lights moved with it, maintaining a constant distance from the road, about 50 yards into the forest. They bobbed up and down in a strange, unnatural rhythm, a sort of synchronized, lurching dance. The sight sent a cold shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the frigid air. This wasn't a search party, this was something else. A wave of primal fear, the kind you read about but never truly understand until you feel it, washed over me. This was the fear of the unknown, the fear of the dark woods that is ingrained in our DNA from a time when we were prey, not predators. My heart started to pound a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. My breathing became shallow. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Methane, gas, some kind of phosphorescent fungus, a group of pranksters trying to scare truckers on a lonely road? None of it fit. The light was too steady for swamp gas, the movement too intelligent for fungus. And no one in their right mind would be out here in this fog on this night just for a prank. I kept driving, my eyes darting between the white line on the road and the ghostly lights in the woods. They were still there, keeping pace, their flickering glow a constant, menacing presence in the corner of my eye. They seemed to be flanking me, escorting me, or perhaps hurting me. The thought sent another jolt of terror through me. I had to get a better look. Against my better judgment, I eased the truck to a complete stop. The air brakes hissed, the sound shockingly loud in the profound silence. For a moment, everything was still. My engine idled, a low rumble. The lights in the woods also stopped. They hung there, suspended in the fog and darkness, their bobbing motion ceasing. They were waiting, watching. I reached over and grabbed the most powerful flashlight I own, a heavy military-grade mag light that throws a beam like a laser. My hand was trembling as I pointed it out the open window, aiming it at the spot where the lights were clustered. I took a deep breath and flicked the switch. The beam of pure white light cut a perfect sharp tunnel through the fog. It sliced through the darkness, illuminating the massive moss-covered trunks of the ancient pines, the wet needle-strewn forest floor, and nothing. There was nothing there. Where the flickering yellow lights had been just a second before, there was now only empty forest. No people, no lanterns, no footprints in the damp earth. Nothing. Just the trees and the fog and the silence. I swept the beam back and forth, my heart hammering against my chest. It didn't make sense. They were right there. I saw them. I wasn't hallucinating. I turned off the flashlight, plunging the woods back into blackness, and as my eyes readjusted, they returned. One by one, the small flickering lights winked back into existence, in the exact same spot, as if my powerful beam had passed right through them, as if they existed on a different plane of reality that was only visible in the dark. That was the moment my fear turned into pure, unadulterated terror. This was not natural. This was not human. This was something wrong, something ancient and malevolent that lived in the heart of these mountains, and I had trespassed into its domain. I didn't wait for another second. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The engine roared in protest and the tires spun for a terrifying moment on the slick asphalt before finding purchase. The truck lurched forward, gaining speed. As I accelerated, the lights in the woods reacted. Their calm, rhythmic bobbing turned into a frantic, chaotic dance. They began to scatter, darting back and forth between the trees like startled fireflies, but they weren't retreating. They were closing in. Some of them shot forward, moving from deep in the woods to the very edge of the road with impossible speed. They zipped past my window, blurs of yellow light, so close I felt like I could reach out and touch them. There was no sound, no heat, just the silent, terrifying speed of their movement. I was no longer just driving. I was fleeing. I pushed the truck faster than I ever would have dared on this road in this fog. The rig swayed dangerously on the tight curves. The massive load of lumber shifted behind me, the chains groaning under the strain. I was risking my life, risking a fiery crash, but it felt safer than the alternative. It felt safer than letting those things catch me. For what felt like an eternity, the lights swarmed my truck. They were on both sides of me now, a frantic, silent convoy of ghostly lights escorting me through the midnight fog. I could see them in my mirrors, a swarm of them following close behind. I had the horrifying sensation of being hunted by a pack of supernatural predators. I didn't know what they were, and I didn't want to know. I just knew I had to get away. I risked a glance at the passenger seat and my heart stopped. One of the lights was inside the cab. It was hovering in the empty space above the passenger seat, a small, pulsating sphere of soft, yellow light. It was about the size of a human fist, and it cast a warm, gentle glow on the dashboard and the leather of the seat. But there was nothing gentle about the feeling it gave off. It radiated a cold that was worse than the frigid mountain air, a deep, psychic cold filled with an ancient and profound sadness. As I stared at it, frozen in terror, I felt a wave of despair wash over me, a feeling of utter hopelessness. I screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure animal fear. I swatted at it, my hand passing right through the light as if it were nothing but a projection. The light flickered, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, it shot out the closed passenger window and rejoined the swarm outside. The summit of the pass was just ahead. I knew the road would soon begin its long, winding descent down the eastern slope. I prayed that whatever these things were, they were bound to this specific place, this peak. I pushed the engine to its limit, the roar echoing in the fog-shrouded landscape. As I crested the summit and started down the other side, the lights began to fall back. One by one, they peeled off, retreating back into the depths of the forest. The swarm behind me thinned out. The last light, a single lonely flicker, paced me for another 100 yards, and then it too veered off into the trees and vanished. I was alone again. But the silence was different now. It was no longer a peaceful, meditative silence. It was an empty, menacing silence filled with the memory of what I had just seen. The fog began to thin as I descended, and soon I could see the moon again, a pale, indifferent disk in the sky. I didn't stop driving until I saw the first lights of the town I was heading to. I pulled my rig over to the side of the road, my body trembling so violently that I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat there for a long time watching the sun rise, its warm pink light chasing the last of the shadows from the mountains. It felt like waking from a nightmare. I delivered the lumber. The contractor complained that I was an hour late. I just stared at him, my mind a million miles away, back in the fog with the silent, dancing lights. I took his money and left. I had to drive back over the mountains a few days later. The main highway was open again. I took it. As I passed the turnoff for Sierra Road, I slowed down. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. The road looked innocent, just a strip of asphalt winding its way up into the green forest. It looked peaceful, but I knew what was up there waiting for the fog. I've talked to some of the old-timers, other loggers who have spent their lives in these mountains. When I tell them my story, most of them just shake their heads and tell me I was tired, that the fog was playing tricks on my eyes. But a very few, get a strange look in their eyes. They nod slowly and tell me old stories. Stories the Native American tribes of this area used to tell. Stories of the spirit lights. They say the lights are the souls of people who died in the mountains, lost in the snow, or fallen from a cliff. Others say they are something older, elemental spirits of the forest itself who resent the intrusion of men and their machines. They say the lights are a warning, and sometimes they are more than a warning. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know it was real. It changed me. I still drive the mountains, it's the only life I know. But I don't see them the same way. When I look at the deep woods, I don't just see trees anymore. I see the darkness between the trees, and I know that in that darkness things are watching and waiting for the fog to roll in. My name is Chloe Ramirez. I'm 30 years old and I've been an independent hauler for the past 6 years. It's a life I chose, not one I fell into. I was working a dead-end office job, staring at the same 4 beige walls every day, my world shrinking with each passing year. The open road was a promise of freedom, a way to see the country on my own terms. My rig, a meticulously maintained Kenworth W900, isn't just a truck. It's my home, my office, and my escape pod. I specialize in hot shot loads, urgent high-value cargo that needs to get from point A to point B as fast as humanly possible. This often means driving through the dead of night, across the most desolate parts of the country. And there are few places more desolate than the, Mojave Desert. I've always had a strange relationship with the Mojave. Most people see it as a vast, empty nothingness, a hostile void to be crossed as quickly as possible. I've always found a unique beauty in its starkness. There's a purity to it. The way the landscape stretches to an infinite horizon, the palette of muted browns and grays, the sheer resilience of the life that clings to existence there. It's humbling. But the defining characteristic of the desert, the one that truly gets under your skin, is its soundscape. The desert is never truly silent. There's always a sound, a constant hum of existence. During the day, it's the relentless whisper of the wind, a dry, sandy breath that never seems to stop. It's the buzz of insects, the distant caw of a raven circling on the thermals. At night, it's the chirping of crickets, the yip of a far-off coyote, the rustle of unseen creatures in the scrub brush. And always, always, there is the sound of your truck, the deep resonant growl of the diesel engine, the whine of the turbo, the rhythmic thump of the tires on the cracked asphalt. These sounds are a comfort, a constant reminder that you are moving, that you are alive, that you are a part of the world. They are the soundtrack to my life. Until one night in the dead heart of the Mojave, the music stopped. The job was a typical one for me. I was hauling a sensitive server rack, a piece of high-tech equipment worth more than my entire rig, from a data center in Phoenix to a tech campus in Silicon Valley. The deadline was brutal, requiring a non-stop, straight-through drive. The route took me along a stretch of two-lane highway that cuts directly through one of the most remote and uninhabited parts of the Mojave National Preserve. It's a lonely road, a place where you can drive for an hour or more without seeing another pair of headlights. I hit that stretch of road around 2 a.m. The moon was a tiny silver sliver offering little light. The sky was a vast black velvet blanket punctured by a brilliant spray of stars that you can only see in a place with zero light pollution. It was beautiful and intimidating. My dashboard lights cast a familiar green glow over the cab, and a classic rock station was playing softly on the radio. I was in my element, comfortable and focused, sipping a lukewarm coffee from a thermos. The world felt right. I first noticed it as a subtle change. It wasn't a sudden event, but a gradual fading. The music on the radio, which had been clear just moments before, began to dissolve into static, as if I were driving out of the station's range. That was normal enough out here. I reached over and switched off the radio, preferring the familiar sounds of my truck to the hiss of static. I took another sip of coffee and settled in for the long, quiet miles ahead. But the quiet was different. I continued driving for another few minutes before my brain finally caught up and registered. What was wrong? It was the engine. I couldn't hear it. My foot was on the accelerator, the RPM gauge was steady at 1,500, and the truck was moving forward at a solid 65 miles per hour. The engine was running. It had to be. But the sound, the deep, powerful roar that was the constant companion of my life, was gone. There was no vibration in the steering wheel, no rumble felt through the floorboards and the seat. It was as if the engine had been replaced by a silent electric motor. My heart gave a little flutter of confusion. I eased my foot off the accelerator and then pressed it again. The truck responded, slowing and then speeding up. The needle on the speedometer moved. The RPM gauge moved, but there was no corresponding change in sound, no roar of acceleration, no Jake brake growl, just nothing. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I rolled down my window, expecting to be hit by the familiar rush of wind and the roar of the engine from the outside. The window slid down smoothly and the cool, dry desert air flowed into the cab. But there was no sound, no rush of wind against the side of my truck. No howl of air being displaced by a 40-ton vehicle moving at highway speed. The tires, which should have been producing a constant hypnotic hum on the asphalt, were silent. I stuck my head out the window and looked at the massive chrome exhaust stacks rising behind my cab. They should have been bellowing smoke and a deafening roar. They were silent. I looked down at the road, a blur of asphalt passing just feet below me. The motion was there, but the sound of it was gone. The world outside my windows had become a silent movie. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in my throat. I was in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, and the fundamental laws of physics seemed to have been suspended. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, I tried the CB radio, a piece of equipment I rarely used but kept for emergencies. I keyed the mic. "Breaker 19, is anyone out there? Come back." The speaker emitted only a dead, flat silence. No static, no hiss, nothing. The silence was not peaceful. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket. It was a physical presence in the cab, a pressure against my eardrums. It felt like the world had been put on mute, or like I had been encased in a block of clear gelatin. The only sound I could hear was the frantic, terrified pounding of my own heart and the ragged sound of my own breathing. And even those sounds were strangely muffled and distant, as if they were happening to someone else. I felt an overwhelming wave of vertigo and disorientation. Our brains are wired to process a constant stream of sensory information. The sound of our own movement, the world around us, it's all part of how we locate ourselves in space and time. With all of that stripped away, my mind was struggling to cope. I felt untethered, disconnected from reality. Was I even moving? The visual information said yes, but the complete lack of auditory confirmation was deeply, profoundly unsettling. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. Had I gone deaf? I clapped my hands together right next to my ear. I heard it, a dull, flat thump, but it was muted like hearing it from underwater. So I wasn't completely deaf. Was it some kind of bizarre atmospheric phenomenon? A temperature inversion creating a pocket of absolute silence? It seemed impossible. A violation of everything I knew about science. The experience lasted for what felt like an eternity, but my truck's clock told me it was only 3 minutes. 3 minutes of the most profound and terrifying isolation I have ever experienced. I was a ghost in a ghost truck gliding silently through a dead world. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my eyes wide with terror, just trying to keep the truck on the road, praying for it to end. I started to wonder if I was dead, if I'd had a heart attack or an aneurysm, and this was some kind of purgatory, doomed to drive this silent road forever. And then, as suddenly and inexplicably as it had stopped, the sound came back. It wasn't a gradual return, it was an explosion. One moment there was absolute silence. The next, the world rushed back in a deafening, violent wave. The roar of the engine, the whine of the tires, the rush of the wind, it all hit me at once. A physical blow of sound that was so loud and shocking it made me cry out. It was like 1,000 televisions being turned to full volume at the same instant. My ears rang, and I physically flinched, my body recoiling from the sensory assault. I immediately slammed on the brakes, the screech of the tires and the powerful hiss of the air brakes, a sound so beautiful and reassuring that I almost wept with relief. The rig shuddered to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence that followed was a normal silence, a peaceful silence, filled with the ticking of the cooling engine and the gentle chirping of crickets from the darkness. I sat there for a long time, my whole body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned the radio back on, and the familiar sound of a guitar solo filled the cab. It was the most wonderful thing I had ever heard. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say I fell asleep, that I had a microsleep and dreamed the whole thing. But I know I was awake. I have the memory of it, sharp and clear and terrifying. I've tried to research it since. I've read about strange acoustic dead zones, about infrasound phenomena that can cause feelings of dread and unease. I've even read bizarre theories about government weapons testing in the desert, about localized vacuum fields. Nothing comes close to explaining the totality of what I experienced. I still drive the Mojave. It's part of my job. But it's different now. I no longer see its emptiness as beautiful. I see it as a void. I see it as a place where the rules are thin, where reality can be switched off like a light. Sometimes on those long, lonely nights when the road is empty and the stars are bright, I feel a flicker of that old fear. I find myself listening intently to the hum of my engine, to the sound of my tires on the road, praying that they don't fade away. Because I know now that the worst thing in the world isn't a loud noise in the dark. It's the silence, the absolute, perfect, impossible silence. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 36, and I've spent the last decade of my life hauling freight up and down the Pacific coast. My regular route takes me from the sprawling ports of Los Angeles to the docks of Seattle, and the centerpiece of that journey is U.S. Route 101, the Redwood Highway. There's no road like it on Earth. To drive it is to enter another world, a world belonging to giants. The trees are the first thing that get you. They are ancient, colossal beings, some of them over 300 feet tall and 2,000 years old. They form a dense living canopy that blocks out the sky, plunging the road into a perpetual green-tinted twilight, even at high noon. Driving through a grove of old-growth redwoods feels less like being in a forest and more like being at the bottom of the ocean. The light is dim and filtered, the air is cool and damp, and a profound, cathedral-like silence hangs between the massive pillar-like trunks. It's a humbling, almost spiritual experience. By day, it feels like a sanctuary. At night, it feels like a tomb. I've driven the 101 at night more times than I can count. You get used to the darkness, to the way the giant trees create a tunnel effect, your headlights cutting a lone path through an endless black corridor. You get used to the feeling of being small and insignificant in the face of such ancient grandeur. But you never get used to the feeling that you are being watched. The forest is so dense, so dark, that your imagination can run wild. Every shadow seems to hold a shape. Every gust of wind sounds like a whisper. I'd always dismissed it as just that, imagination. Until one foggy night in late autumn, when the forest decided to show me one of its secrets. I was heading north, hauling a container of mixed goods. I was running a bit behind schedule, pushing through the night to make up for time lost in Bay Area traffic. Around 3 a.m., I entered one of the most famous and densest groves, a stretch of road where the redwoods are so large and so close to the asphalt that they feel like the walls of a canyon. A thick, wet fog was rolling in from the coast, weaving itself between the giant trunks and further reducing the already limited visibility. It was a classic redwood highway night, dark, damp, and deeply atmospheric. I was the only one on the road. For over an hour, I hadn't seen another vehicle heading in either direction. The solitude was complete. It was just me, the low rumble of my diesel engine, and the endless silent ranks of the giant trees. That's when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first it was a relief. The sudden appearance of another traveler in this vast emptiness made the world feel a little less lonely. But as the lights grew closer, I realized it wasn't just one vehicle. It was a whole series of them, a long line of headlights stretching back into the fog. A convoy. It was unusual to see so much traffic out here at this time of night, but not impossible. Maybe it was a group of truckers who decided to travel together for safety. The lead vehicle closed the distance quickly and pulled into the oncoming lane to overtake me. As it drew alongside my cab, I glanced over, ready to give the customary nod to a fellow trucker. The nod died in my throat. It wasn't a modern semi-truck. It was a military truck, a GMC CCKW, the classic deuce and a half that was the workhorse of the U.S. Army in World War II. It was in pristine condition, its olive drab paint looking fresh, its canvas canopy stretched taut over the cargo bed. It looked like it had just rolled off a 1940s assembly line. My mind struggled to process it. A historical reenactment group? A movie shoot? Out here in the middle of the night in the fog? But the strangest part was the sound. There was none. The massive antique truck, which should have been rattling and roaring with the sound of its old engine, was completely silent. It glided past my window like a ghost, the only sound being the faint hiss of its tires on the wet pavement. As it passed, I looked at the soldiers in the back. The cargo bed was filled with them, about a dozen men in period uniforms, complete with steel helmets. They sat rigidly on the wooden benches, their rifles held upright between their knees. They didn't look at me. They stared straight ahead, their faces pale and grim in the faint light. Their expressions were unnervingly blank, their eyes hollow and dark, like the eyes of men who have seen too much. They weren't actors playing a part. They looked like the real thing. They looked like ghosts. Before I could fully process the first truck, the second one was already passing me. It was identical to the first, another silent deuce and a half, filled with another squad of grim-faced, spectral soldiers. Then a third, and a fourth. A whole phantom convoy, a procession of ghosts from a forgotten war, was overtaking me on that lonely, fog-shrouded highway. I counted 12 trucks in total. They all moved with the same eerie silence, the same impossible smoothness. They were completely out of place, completely out of time. My trucker's brain, the part of me that deals in logic and mechanics, was screaming that this was impossible. My gut, however, was screaming something else entirely. It was screaming that I was seeing something I was not meant to see, a wound in time that had briefly opened on this ancient road. I was terrified, but I was also mesmerized. I watched, my heart pounding in my chest, as the last truck in the convoy passed me. The line of red, period-accurate taillights stretched out ahead of me, a ghostly red snake winding its way through the black forest. They maintained a perfect, disciplined formation, an unwavering line in the swirling fog. I followed them for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few miles. I kept my distance, feeling like an intruder, a witness to a secret ceremony. The road ahead curved sharply to the left. The convoy, however, did not. One by one, the trucks continued straight. The lead truck, without slowing down, without its brake lights even flickering, took a non-existent turnoff. It veered to the right and drove directly off the road, straight into the solid wall of ancient, colossal redwood trees. I braced for the sound of a horrific crash, the screech of metal, the splintering of wood, the explosion. But there was nothing. The truck simply vanished. It drove into the trees and disappeared as if it were driving into a bank of fog. Its headlights and taillights were there one moment, and the next they were gone, swallowed by the impenetrable darkness of the forest. Then the second truck did the same thing. It followed the first, veering off the road at the exact same spot and vanishing into the solid wall of trees. Then the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. The entire phantom convoy, in perfect silent succession, drove off the road and into oblivion. I watched, my mouth agape, my mind refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. As the last truck in the line followed its comrades, its taillights winking out of existence as it was consumed by the forest. And then, they were gone. The road ahead of me was empty. The fog swirled in my headlights. The forest was silent. It was as if the entire event had never happened. I pulled my truck over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put it in park. I got out of the cab, the damp, cold air hitting my face. I walked to the spot where the convoy had turned off. There was no turnoff. There was no side road. There was just the edge of the asphalt, a small, muddy shoulder, and then the solid, unbroken line of giant redwood trees, their bark like wrinkled elephant hide. There were no tire tracks in the mud. There were no broken branches, no sign that a dozen multi-ton trucks had just driven through there. There was nothing. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the forest pressing in on me. I eventually got back in my truck and kept driving, but the rest of the journey was a blur. The image of those silent trucks, those hollow-eyed soldiers, and their impossible disappearance was burned into my mind. When I reached my destination, I started asking questions. I spent hours in a local library near the Oregon border, digging through old newspapers and local history books. And I found it. It was a small article from a 1944 newspaper. It told the story of a platoon of soldiers from a nearby training camp who had gone missing during a routine transport exercise. They were driving in a convoy of 12 trucks through the Redwood Highway on a foggy night. They left their base, but they never arrived at their destination. A massive search was launched, but no trace of the men or their trucks was ever found. They had simply vanished without a trace, swallowed by the vast ancient forest. The official military report concluded that the lead driver must have become disoriented in the fog and driven off the road into a hidden ravine, with the rest of the convoy following him. But they never found the ravine. They never found a single piece of wreckage. I don't know what I saw that night. Was it a mass hallucination, a trick of the fog, and an overactive imagination fueled by local lore? Or did I witness the ghostly replay of a 70-year-old tragedy? Was that convoy of silent soldiers still out there, forever driving that lonely stretch of highway? Forever trying to complete their final mission? Forever turning off onto a road that isn't there? I still drive the Redwood Highway. It's my job, but I no longer see it as just a forest. I see it as a place of deep memory, a place that holds onto its secrets. And on those dark, foggy nights when I'm alone on the road, I find myself checking my rearview mirror more often than I should, half expecting, half dreading to see a long line of faint round headlights appear behind me, emerging from the mists of time. My name is Isabel Nguyen, and at 29, I'm what they call a produce hauler. It sounds simple, but it's a high-pressure gig. My world is a race against the clock, a constant battle against decay. I transport the bounty of California's Central Valley, the fruits, nuts, and vegetables that feed the nation. From the fields where they're picked to the packing houses and distribution centers. Every minute counts. A delay of a few hours can be the difference between a fresh, valuable load and a truck full of rejected, rotting organic matter. This pressure forces you to know the roads, not just the main highways, but the back roads, the farm roads, the shortcuts that can save you precious time. The San Joaquin Valley is a world unto itself. It's a vast, flat plain of incredible fertility, gridded with an intricate, bewildering maze of agricultural roads. These roads have no names, only numbers, and they all look the same. Straight, narrow strips of asphalt bordered by endless fields of almond trees, grapevines, or cotton. It's easy to get lost out here if you're not careful, to find yourself in a labyrinth of identical-looking orchards and irrigation canals. I prided myself on my knowledge of this maze, on my ability to navigate it better than any GPS. But one sweltering summer evening, my pride led me to a place that wasn't on any map, a place where a forgotten tragedy still lingered in the heavy, humid air. I was hauling a full load of late-season peaches from a farm deep in the Delta region. I was running late. The harvest had been delayed, and I'd spent hours waiting for the loading crew to finish. Now the sun was setting, painting the dusty sky in shades of orange and purple, and I was facing the prospect of a late delivery penalty. I was studying my map, a worn, heavily annotated paper map, which I trusted far more than any electronic device. And I saw it, a potential shortcut. It was a small, unmarked bridge that crossed one of the deep, wide irrigation canals that crisscrossed the valley. According to my map, this bridge would cut a full 45 minutes off my route, allowing me to bypass a congested junction near Stockton. I had never used this particular road before, but it was there on the map, a thin black line connecting two farm roads. It was a risk, but I was desperate. I decided to take it. I turned off the main county road and onto a narrow, poorly maintained access road. The asphalt was cracked and bumpy, and rows of dense, overgrown walnut trees crowded the edges, their branches scraping against the sides of my trailer. The sun had set now, and a deep twilight was settling over the valley. The air was thick, humid, and filled with the sweet, cloying smell of ripe fruit and damp earth. It was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of the valley, tractors, irrigation pumps, distant highway traffic, all absent. I followed the winding road for several miles, my headlights cutting a tunnel through the darkness. The road grew narrower and more decrepit with every mile. I was starting to feel a prickle of unease. This road felt abandoned. It felt like a place people actively avoided. But my map said the bridge was just ahead, and the thought of saving those 45 minutes pushed me forward. Finally, I saw it, and my heart sank. The bridge wasn't just old, it was a ruin. It was a skeletal structure of rusted steel and rotting wooden planks, the kind of bridge that might have been built in the 1930s or 40s. A crude, hand-painted sign, riddled with bullet holes, was nailed to a post at the entrance. In faded, peeling letters, it read, "Bridge out, dangerous." The entrance to the bridge was blocked by a series of heavy concrete K-rails, leaving no doubt that it had been closed for decades. My shortcut was a dead end. I let out a string of curses, furious at myself for my stupidity, for trusting a mark on an old map. Now I had to turn my entire 80,000-pound rig around on a narrow road with deep ditches on either side. It would be a difficult, time-consuming maneuver, a series of frustrating back and forths. Killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying my frustration, and got out of the cab to survey the situation, my flashlight cutting a sharp beam in the darkness. The bridge was a terrifying sight. The wooden roadbed was riddled with holes, some of them large enough for a person to fall through. The steel trusses were bleeding rust, and the entire structure was draped in a thick shroud of vines and overgrown vegetation, as if the surrounding swamp was trying to swallow it whole. The canal below was wide and deep, the water black and stagnant in the darkness. As I stood there planning my difficult turnaround, a flicker of movement on the bridge caught my eye. I froze, my flashlight beam snapping towards the source of the motion. It was about halfway across the bridge. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. It was small and low to the ground. Then it moved again, rolling slowly out of a patch of deep shadow and into the center of my flashlight beam. It was a tricycle. A child's tricycle. It was old, its chrome handlebars pitted with rust, its red paint faded and peeling, one of its plastic handlebar tassels missing. It was an artifact from another era, a toy that had been lost or abandoned decades ago. But it wasn't just sitting there, it was moving. It rolled slowly, jerkily across the decaying wooden planks of the bridge, moving from the far side towards me. It was moving against the slight breeze that was blowing, its front wheel wobbling as it navigated the uneven surface. It was moving as if something was pushing it. My blood ran cold. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. The wind? A vibration from my truck, even with the engine off? The bridge settling? None of it made sense. The movement was too deliberate, too steady. The tricycle continued its slow, inexorable journey across the bridge until it reached the very center, directly over the dark water of the canal. And then, it stopped. It just sat there, perfectly still, a single rusted toy in the beam of my flashlight, a silent, impossible sentinel on a ruined bridge. I stood there paralyzed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air grew heavy and cold. The sweet smell of the valley was replaced by a damp, musty odor, the smell of river mud and decay. I couldn't take my eyes off the tricycle. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen, a mundane object made monstrous by its context. And then I heard the sound. It was faint, carried on the heavy night air. It was a sound that had no business being out here in this desolate, abandoned place. It was the sound of a child giggling. It was a light, airy sound, a sound of innocent joy, but in that place, at that moment, it was the most horrifying sound in the world. It wasn't coming from the tricycle. It seemed to be coming from all around me, from the darkness under the bridge, from the rustling leaves of the trees. It was a disembodied sound, an echo of a long past, happiness that had curdled into something deeply, profoundly wrong. A wave of pure, primal terror washed over me. This wasn't just an abandoned bridge, it was a haunted one. The story, a piece of local lore I'd heard once from an old farmer and dismissed as a campfire tale, came rushing back into my mind with sickening clarity. He'd told me about the bridge's construction back before the war. He'd told me about the accident. A site foreman had brought his young son to work one day. The boy, no older than 5, had been riding his tricycle on the nearly completed bridge when he'd lost his balance. He'd fallen through a gap in the planks, down into the deep, fast-moving water of the canal. They searched for days, but they never found his body. The giggling started again, closer this time. It was followed by a soft splashing sound from the dark water below the bridge. That's what broke my paralysis. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I just turned and ran. I scrambled back into the cab of my truck, my hands shaking so violently I could barely find the key. I jammed it into the ignition and the engine roared to life. The sound, a comforting, powerful roar against the terrifying silence and the ghostly giggles. I didn't even attempt the careful multi-point turn I had planned. I threw the truck in reverse and slammed my foot on the accelerator, backing up blindly and recklessly down the narrow road. A branch scraped and screeched along the side of my trailer, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that bridge. After 100 yards, I cranked the wheel, jackknifing the rig and tearing up the soft earth of the shoulder, not caring about the potential damage. I got the truck pointed in the right direction and I floored it. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I didn't want to see the bridge. I didn't want to see the rusted tricycle sitting in the middle of it. And I certainly didn't want to see who might be standing behind it. I drove with a frantic, desperate energy until I hit the familiar, well-lit county road. I pulled over, my body shaking, my clothes soaked with cold sweat. The late delivery penalty was the furthest thing from my mind. I've never told another soul what I saw that night. They wouldn't believe it. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. I threw away that old paper map. I stick to the main roads now, the ones on the GPS, the ones I know are safe. I'll take a late penalty any day over another shortcut into the dark, forgotten corners of the valley. Because I know now that some places are abandoned for a reason. They are left to the ghosts that claim them. And out there in the darkness, a little boy is still playing on his tricycle, forever waiting for someone to come and find him. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoy these stories, let me know in the comments and tell me which one you liked the most. Don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe to Horror Whispers for more chilling tales.